I never thought a sleepover could change the way I looked at the world. Not in the way this one did. Growing up, I was the kid who checked the locks twice, who double-checked the garage door before going to bed, who carried my camera everywhere like a security blanket. My parents joked that I was prepared for the apocalypse while I insisted I was just cautious. I liked having control, and being 15, control felt like the only thing standing between me and chaos. That Friday night, Mason invited me over for a weekend sleepover. His parents were out visiting relatives, leaving the house empty, except for the occasional creak of the floorboards that made me jump. Mason's house was typical suburban, white siding, dark shutters, a swing in the backyard. But the quiet of Elmwood after 9 o'clock always made shadows feel alive. We started like any other sleepover. Pizza rolls on a paper plate, Mountain Dew cans scattered across the living room carpet, and an old horror movie streaming on Mason's beat-up TV. We were sprawled across the floor in sleeping bags, throwing popcorn at each other and laughing at ridiculous jump scares on screen. Mason made a terrible impression of a zombie, growling at me until I tripped over the couch. But even amid the jokes, I couldn't shake a feeling that something was off. The wind rattled the windows, the lights flickered slightly, and the shadows in the corners seemed darker than usual. I tried to tell myself it was just the storm, that my imagination was running wild. "It's just the wind, right?" I said, forcing a laugh. Mason shrugged, tossing a slice of pizza into his mouth. "Yeah, don't let a little storm scare you out, man." I nodded, but my stomach twisted. Earlier that week, I'd read about a break-in in the next town over. Teenagers, sleepovers. It seemed like a scene out of a nightmare, but it had happened. I had tried to brush it off, telling myself I was being paranoid, but when I grabbed another soda from the kitchen and heard a soft thud upstairs, like someone had dropped a shoe, I froze. Mason didn't notice. "Did you hear that?" I whispered. "Probably just the house settling," Mason replied, his eyes glued to the TV. I wanted to believe him. I really did. But then came a louder crash from the hallway near the bedrooms. My hand went instinctively to Mason's old baseball bat under the couch. My pulse thundered in my ears as I crept toward the sound, trying to remain calm, trying to convince myself it was nothing. And then the slow, deliberate creak of footsteps reached me. They weren't Mason's. I froze, the bat heavy in my hands. Every instinct screamed at me to run, but my legs felt glued to the carpet. My phone buzzed. Mason's mom. A lifeline. I typed frantically. "Someone's in the house. Call 911. Mason finally looked up, confusion written all over his face. "What are you talking about?" he asked. Just then, the front door slammed with a force that rattled the frame. The doorknob shook violently. I realized with a cold, sinking feeling that the door had been unlocked. Whoever it was had slipped in while we were distracted, probably waiting for the house to be empty. We ducked into Mason's bedroom closet, the bat clutched in both hands. Heavy footsteps echoed down the hallway. I could hear my own heartbeat, a deafening drum, blending with the intruder's slow, methodical breathing. Minutes stretched into hours. Every shadow in the closet felt alive. Every gust of wind against the window sounded like someone pacing outside. I tried to whisper to Mason to calm myself. "We need to stay quiet. Don't make a sound." He nodded, wide-eyed and trembling. "Do you think they're armed?" "I don't know," I admitted, "but we have to assume they are." Time became a blur of darkness, fear, and tiny noises, the creak of floorboards, the scrape of something against a wall. Every second felt like a lifetime. I thought of all the stories I'd read, all the what-ifs my cautious brain had imagined, but nothing had prepared me for the cold, real feeling of someone inside our house. Then, in the distance, sirens. They cut through the night, sharp and urgent. The footsteps outside the closet seemed to pause, then retreat. When the police arrived minutes later, the intruder was gone, leaving behind muddy footprints and a tangible sense that we had been watched. Even after the immediate danger passed, I couldn't sleep at home for weeks. Every storm, every flicker of light, every creak of a floorboard brought me back to that night. Mason's parents installed cameras, reinforced locks, even got a dog, but the unease lingered. It wasn't just fear, it was the realization that safety is fragile, that evil can slip silently into the places we thought were ours. And that night, what started as a fun, ordinary sleepover became the first lesson I would never forget. Vigilance isn't paranoia, and even the safest walls can't protect you from everyone. The days after the sleepover were the hardest. I went back to school, walked the same quiet suburban streets, but everything felt different. Every rustle of leaves, every gust of wind against a window felt like it could be someone lurking in the shadows waiting for the perfect moment. Mason tried to act normal, joking around in class, but I could see the tension in his shoulders, the way he flinched when someone dropped a book or slammed a locker. At home, I couldn't sleep. I'd lie in bed staring at my ceiling, listening to every tiny sound, the hum of the refrigerator, the occasional creak of the floorboards. I'd pull the covers over my head and try to convince myself it was all in my head, but it wasn't. Not entirely. I remembered the intruder's slow, deliberate breathing, the way he had moved without a sound, the cold precision of someone who had done this before. One evening, I decided I couldn't just sit there. I needed to understand, to regain some sense of control. I grabbed my camera and started photographing the house, walking from room to room, trying to catch every shadow, every corner, every angle. The pictures were mostly mundane, just the living room, the kitchen, Mason's bedroom. But looking at them later, I realized something. My camera captured what my eyes couldn't always see. Shadows shifted oddly in the hallway photos. A dark smudge appeared near the front door, almost like a footprint frozen in time. I showed Mason, hoping he'd brush it off. Instead, his face went pale. I see it, he whispered. It's like it's still there. We started staying awake later, sitting in the living room with the lights on, pretending to play video games, but neither of us was really playing. We listened to every sound, jumped at every knock or creak, and started locking everything twice over. Windows, doors, cabinets. Our friends thought we were overreacting, that we were letting fear run our lives. But fear wasn't the problem. The problem was knowing that safety was an illusion, that someone had violated that illusion and could do it again if they wanted. I began documenting everything. The weather, noises outside, shadows, even my own reactions. It became almost scientific, trying to analyze what triggered panic, what felt real, what was imagination. And slowly, I noticed a pattern. My fear wasn't random, it was memory. Every sound that reminded me of that night sent my adrenaline spiking. Every shadow became a potential threat. The irony was that Mason seemed to recover slightly faster than I did. Maybe because he didn't have my habit of overthinking, my compulsion to prepare for every possible scenario. But for me, that night was a watershed moment. Life didn't stop being normal, but normal didn't feel the same. I wasn't reckless before, I was careful. But now caution had a new weight, a sharper edge. I realized that fear could be a tool if handled correctly, that vigilance wasn't paranoia, and that trauma didn't have to break you if you understood it. Weeks later, the police investigation concluded. They couldn't find the intruder, though the muddy footprints were documented and photographs taken. Mason's parents were more paranoid than ever, installing cameras at every entrance, adding deadbolts, and even setting up motion sensors. The house felt fortified, but strangely smaller. The warmth it once held felt gone, replaced with a constant hum of surveillance and anxiety. One afternoon, I went over to Mason's place to test my camera again. I wandered the house slowly, snapping pictures as I went, trying to find what my eyes missed. When I looked through the photos, I froze. There was a figure in the corner of the living room. Not clear, just a blur of dark clothing, but unmistakable. I didn't see it when I took the picture. My stomach dropped. Had he come back? Was someone still watching us? I showed Mason, expecting him to laugh it off. Instead, he grabbed the picture and studied it, eyes narrowing. "Ethan, we need to talk about something," he said. He hesitated, as if weighing how much to tell me. Finally, he whispered, "I think he knows we're watching, or he wants us to know he was here." The reality hit me then, cold and undeniable. Safety isn't just about locks and cameras. It's about vigilance, awareness, and understanding that control is limited, that someone can violate your world and vanish before you can react. That night I realized the trauma wasn't just fear, it was knowledge. The world had shifted, and there was no going back. Mason and I started practicing routines, locking doors in a certain order, checking windows before sleep, testing escape routes. It became almost obsessive. I hated that it controlled me, but I also knew it kept me alive, kept me prepared. I had learned that the ordinary, like a sleepover, could turn into a nightmare in a heartbeat, and the only way to survive wasn't courage. It was awareness, preparation, and respect for the unknown. Months had passed since that terrifying night, but the memory lingered like a shadow that refused to fade. Every time the wind rattled the windows or a floorboard creaked, my pulse jumped, and I felt that same icy knot in my stomach. Mason had moved past some of the fear, but I could see it in his eyes, the same unease that never left mine. Sleepovers weren't fun anymore, not like they used to be. They were reminders that even the places you trust most could betray you. One Friday evening, I went over to Mason's house again, partly because we had become almost compulsively vigilant, and partly because I needed the comfort of a familiar friend. We spent the early hours joking about games and laughing at absurd horror movie scenes, trying to reclaim some sense of normalcy. But it was always under the surface, the knowledge that we had been violated, that someone had entered our lives uninvited, and that life could pivot from ordinary to terrifying in seconds. Around midnight, a sudden noise shattered the fragile calm. Not the wind, not a creak in the old floors, something deliberate, a soft scrape by the front door. Both of us froze. My hand automatically went to the bat by the couch. Mason's eyes widened, reflecting the same fear I felt, a mirror of that first night. "It's probably nothing," he whispered, though neither of us believed it. I grabbed my phone and texted my parents, then held it tight in my pocket. We moved cautiously toward the door, each step measured, listening for the slightest sound. The noise stopped as abruptly as it began. A shadow flickered at the edge of my vision, and I spun toward it, heart hammering, only to find nothing. That night, for the first time, I realized something. Fear doesn't always come from what you see. It comes from what you know. From understanding that the world is unpredictable, that bad things can happen even in the safest of places, that trust is fragile. And yet I also realized that fear didn't have to control me. It could guide me, make me careful, make me prepared without paralyzing me. We spent the rest of the night awake, checking every door, every window, every dark corner of the house. By morning, exhaustion had taken over, but I felt a strange sense of accomplishment. We weren't victims anymore. We were aware, vigilant, and alive. That night wasn't fun. It wasn't carefree, but it taught me something far more valuable than any sleepover game or horror movie could. The world is unpredictable, yes, but knowledge and preparation are power. Over the following months, Mason and I returned to a semblance of normal life. We still joked, still played video games, still had sleepovers, but the carefree innocence was gone. It had been replaced with awareness, with a quiet respect for the fragility of safety, with an understanding that vigilance isn't paranoia, it's survival. Looking back, I can see how that night changed me. It wasn't just about the intruder or the fear. It was about realizing the limits of control, the importance of trust, and the way ordinary life can be shattered in an instant. I learned that even the most familiar places can hide danger, that vigilance and awareness are gifts, and that courage isn't about ignoring fear. It's about facing it with your eyes wide open. Life is unpredictable, and safety is never guaranteed. But preparation, awareness, and respect for the unknown can help us navigate the darkness without losing ourselves. That night started as a simple sleepover, a harmless rite of passage, and ended as a lesson I'll carry forever. The world may be fragile, but so is our fear, and how we respond to it defines who we become. I've always been the cautious type, the one who notices details most people don't. At 16, my brain seemed permanently wired to overthink. Every sound, every shadow, every minor deviation from normality set off alarms in my chest. That's why sleepovers, even at my best friend Sophie's house, were both exciting and anxiety-inducing. Sophie was my opposite, carefree, bubbly, fearless in a way that made me admire her while simultaneously feeling exposed in comparison. It was mid-October, the air crisp with early fall chill, and Briarwood Heights, our suburban Colorado neighborhood, was the kind of place where everyone waved when you passed. Lawns were neatly mowed, and nothing ever seemed out of place. I remember thinking it was almost too perfect, almost sterile, like a photograph someone forgot to touch up. Sophie's parents were attending a wedding that weekend, leaving us alone in her house with the usual excuses: movie marathons, popcorn, and endless whispers about school drama. The night began like any other sleepover. We set up sleeping bags in her living room, dimmed the lights, and let the flickering glow of the TV fill the space. Sophie chose the spookiest of our collection, a light horror film, just enough to make us giggle nervously without actually frightening ourselves. I had my notebook in hand, doodling in the margins while occasionally glancing at the shadows that danced along the walls. By 10:30, the first raindrops tapped the windows, growing heavier until the rain became a steady torrent. Sophie grinned, hugging her blanket, calling it cozy. I forced a smile but couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. Something about the distorted reflection of the streetlight through the wet window panes felt off. My chest tightened, my stomach flipped. I told myself it was nothing, just the storm. But my instincts didn't lie. Around 11, I noticed a shadow flit past the curtained window. My voice caught as I whispered to Sophie, but she brushed it off with a laugh. "Lightning, Liv. Seriously, stop imagining things." I tried to focus on the movie, but the shadow returned, unmistakably human-shaped, lingering behind the thin curtains. Panic bubbled up. "Sophie, I think someone's outside." We froze as a knock sounded at the door. Hesitant, polite, almost deliberate. Sophie frowned. "Who knocks in a storm like this?" The woman's voice called from the other side, soft and calm. "Hi, I just need to use your phone. Mine died, and my car broke down." Sophie moved to open the door, but I grabbed her arm. "Sophie, wait. Shouldn't we just call 911 first?" The door opened anyway. She stepped inside without waiting for permission, dripping water across the tile, her smile polite but empty. I could feel the tension settle like a weight in the room. Her eyes didn't meet ours. They skimmed the space, taking note of phones, bags, every small detail. My hand trembled as I held my own phone under the couch. The instinct to run warred with the worry of leaving Sophie alone with this stranger. Minutes stretched like hours. The woman drifted closer, tapping her fingers in rhythm with the rain, glancing toward our phones as if testing boundaries. Every instinct screamed at me to act. My mind raced. Should I grab the bat in the corner? Should I yell? Or should I quietly text the police? My throat went dry, heartbeat hammering in my ears. Sophie seemed unnerved but tried to keep the tone light, chatting casually about her broken car problem and pretending she wasn't scared. When the woman leaned down toward Sophie's backpack, my voice cracked as I shouted, "Leave! Get out now!" Startled, she froze for a heartbeat, then bolted toward the door, slipping into the stormy night. We didn't wait a second. Sophie and I scrambled after her, but the street was empty, nothing but rain and the occasional flicker of streetlights reflecting on puddles. She was gone. No footprints, No trace beyond the wet marks near the side gate, where the police later confirmed she had been circling the house. We called 911 immediately. The officers arrived quickly, taking statements, photographing the scene, and noting footprints in the mud leading up to the side gate. They asked if we knew the woman. We didn't. Everything seemed random, but it wasn't random to me. It was deliberate, calculated. I couldn't sleep that night, or for many nights afterward. Every shadow, every raindrop, every creaking floorboard brought me back to that suffocating weight of a stranger inside the place I trusted most. The following days, Sophie tried to reassure me. "It's over, Liv. She's gone." But I couldn't shake the sense that safety was fragile. I began sketching her, imagining what she looked like from memory, writing every detail in my journal. The curve of her smile, the way she moved, the emptiness in her eyes. It became almost compulsive, like documenting it could contain it somehow. Even small things triggered me. Opening the front door, answering a knock, or hearing rain against the windows made my stomach twist. Sleepovers felt different now. The carefree giggles, the comfort of familiar places, the trust in friends' homes, all of it carried the echo of that night. And yet, in the midst of the fear, I realized something vital. Knowledge and awareness could protect us. The world was unpredictable, and danger could appear where we least expected it. But our instincts, vigilance, and quick thinking were powerful tools. That night was more than just a scary incident. It was a lesson. In the weeks after that night, my life became a before and after split. Before, I could watch the rain without thinking twice. I could answer the door without suspicion. I could sleep without hearing phantom footsteps. After, every sound had meaning. Every shadow was a possibility. At school, Sophie tried to keep things light. She'd joke about our creepy guest and how we'd scared her off. She said it with a smirk, but her eyes betrayed her. The same unease I carried was in her too. She just chose to mask it differently. For me, there was no mask, only the raw edge of constant alertness. One afternoon, I was walking home when I thought I saw her, the woman across the street. She was too far away for me to be sure, bundled in a long coat, head down against the wind. My heart lurched, my breath caught. I ducked into the corner cafe and waited, peering through the window until she disappeared down the block. It might have been her. It might have been no one. But I couldn't shake the feeling that she'd been watching me. That night, I called Sophie. "Liv?" Sophie interrupted. I almost laughed at that. What if she wasn't just looking for a phone? What if she was... We don't even know who she was. Maybe she was harmless. Harmless people don't circle houses in the rain. My parents noticed the change in me too. I started locking my bedroom door at night. I checked windows before bed, sometimes twice, sometimes more. I'd sit by the window, sketching the woman from memory, every line sharper each time I put pen to paper. It was like I was preparing for something I couldn't name, training myself to remember every detail in case she came back. Sophie, on the other hand, wanted to forget. She deleted the security footage from her parents' camera after the police took their copy. She said it was so she could sleep, so she could move on. I wished I could do the same, but my instincts wouldn't let me. Then came the second knock. It was a Thursday night, and Sophie and I were on the phone, doing homework together, while really just chatting. The sound was faint at first, like the edge of a dream. Then it came again. 3 slow, deliberate knocks. Sophie went silent on the other end. "Was that?" "Yes," I said before she could finish. "Call your parents. Now." She didn't, though. She walked toward the door while still on the phone with me, whispering, "There's no one there." But I could hear it in her voice. She was lying. I was halfway out the door to run to her house when Sophie called back. "It's fine," she said too quickly. "It was just some delivery guy dropping something off." "At midnight?" I asked. "Yeah, I don't know. Maybe they got the wrong address." She hung up before I could push further. The next day, she avoided me at school. No texts, no eye contact. I didn't like it. Didn't like how she shut me out when the one thing keeping me steady was knowing she understood the fear. That weekend, I decided to walk to her house. Her parents answered, surprised to see me. "She's upstairs," her mom said, but her tone was distracted. I could hear Sophie's voice faintly from her room. When I opened her door, she jumped like I'd startled her from a nightmare. "What's going on?" I asked. She hesitated, then closed the door behind me. "She came back," she whispered. My chest tightened. "When?" "That knock. It was her. I saw her through the peephole. She just stood there smiling. Then she left." I didn't know whether to be furious or terrified. "Because she didn't do anything," Sophie said. "No, she was there." "Why didn't you tell the police?" "She didn't try to get in. She just wanted me to." The way she said it chilled me more than anything else. This wasn't about a broken phone or a car. This was something else, something deliberate. That night I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about the woman's smile, the way Sophie described it, calm, almost amused. The first time had been unsettling. The second time felt like a message. The third time came without warning. It was late on a Sunday, the kind of night when the air feels heavy before a storm. I was at home, half asleep in bed when my phone buzzed. A text from Sophie. "She's here." I called immediately, but it went to voicemail. My chest tightened. I threw on my sneakers and jacket, ignoring my parents' voices as I bolted for the door. The streets were quiet, damp from a drizzle earlier in the evening. I ran the whole way to Sophie's house. Her front lights were off. I pounded on the door until she opened it, pale and trembling. She didn't speak, just pulled me inside. The living room curtains were drawn, but I could feel the presence of someone outside, like the air had thickened. "She's been walking around the house for an hour," Sophie whispered. "Every time I look through the blinds, she's in a different spot. Back fence, side yard, front porch." Her voice cracked. "She's not trying to break in. She's just watching." I grabbed my phone and called 911, this time refusing to let fear slow me down. The dispatcher told us to stay inside and lock everything. Sophie and I sat in her hallway, backs against the wall, listening to the sound of faint footsteps crunching on the gravel outside. They stopped, then started again, then stopped. When the sirens finally cut through the night, it felt like the air shifted. The footsteps disappeared. By the time the officers checked the property, she was gone. Again. The police took it seriously this time, more seriously than before. They set up extra patrols in the neighborhood, suggested installing motion lights and cameras, and told Sophie's parents to keep the house secured at all times. But the truth was, none of that erased the fear. In the days after, Sophie barely spoke. She avoided going out alone. I found myself doing the same. Even at school, we'd glance toward the doors whenever someone unfamiliar walked by. The world we'd known, safe, predictable, had changed. It's been months now, and she hasn't come back. Maybe she moved on. Maybe she's still out there, watching someone else. Or maybe she's waiting. I still draw her face sometimes, not because I want to remember, but because I can't forget. The curve of her smile, the way she stood too still, too calm, the eyes that seemed to look past you and into something deeper. That night taught me something I wish I didn't have to learn. Danger doesn't always come crashing through the door. Sometimes it knocks softly. Sometimes it smiles. Sometimes it waits until you convince yourself you're safe again. We like to think safety is about locks, lights, and fences, but safety, I've learned, starts with paying attention, really paying attention, to the quiet things that feel wrong. And if your gut tells you something's not right, you listen. Always. People say you know your neighbors best when you've grown up side by side with them, but that's not always true. Sometimes you just know the parts they want you to see, the friendly waves from the driveway, the borrowed cup of sugar, the quick chats on the sidewalk. That washoe it was with Ella's family. I'd been in and out of their house for years, never once thinking of it as anything but a safe place. It was a chilly Friday night in November, the kind where you feel the bite of the air the second you step outside. My parents were heading to dinner with friends, and Ella's parents were driving out of town for a weekend conference. We'd planned the sleepover days in advance. Movies, snacks, and maybe a late-night round of truth or dare if we didn't fall asleep first. When I walked into Ella's house that evening, she already had the living room lit up with warm lamps and music playing low from her phone. A pile of board games sat on the coffee table, and the smell of microwaved popcorn lingered in the air. "Perfect timing," she said, plopping down on the couch and tossing me a bag of pretzels. We started with a board game, half playing and half talking about school. Outside, the wind tapped at the windows like impatient fingers. Around 9:30, I caught something strange, a faint, moving light outside the backyard window. It was small, like the beam from a flashlight, gliding slowly across the far end of the yard. "Ella," I said quietly, "do you see that?" She leaned forward, squinting. "Probably just the street lamp. It's been flickering all week." I wanted to believe her, but the light moved in a way a street lamp couldn't. It disappeared behind the shed, then reappeared closer, skimming across the grass. My chest tightened. We brushed it off and decided to head down to the basement to watch a horror movie. It felt like a safe kind of scare, the kind you could laugh at later. The basement smelled faintly of laundry detergent and old carpet, and the ceiling lights buzzed faintly as they warmed up. That's when I noticed the basement door. It had a small brass lock at the top, one of those old-fashioned ones you have to jiggle to latch, and it was half open. "Huh. Wasn't this usually locked?" I asked. "Probably," Ella said with a shrug. "It's fine. The house is empty." We curled up on the couch with blankets and let the movie start. I tried to focus on the characters' predictable bad decisions, but my ears kept straining for sounds above us. Around halfway through, there it was, a soft thud from upstairs like something heavy being dropped. I looked at Ella. "Did you hear that?" "Maybe one of the cats," she said automatically, then paused. "Oh wait, we don't have cats." The smile that had been on her face faltered. I felt the muscles in my stomach tighten. We didn't move. We just sat there, letting the movie's background noise cover the uneasy silence in the real world. I told myself it could have been anything. The wind, the old pipes. But that didn't explain the sound of slow, deliberate footsteps above us a few minutes later. 20 minutes passed before the basement door moved. I didn't see it happen. I just heard the click as it shut. The sound was quiet, almost gentle, but it dropped like a stone in my chest. I got up immediately and tried the handle. It didn't turn. I pulled harder, then shoved my shoulder against it. Nothing. "It's stuck," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. Ella came over and tried too. The lock felt jammed, but the door had been open moments ago. There was no draft, no slam from the wind. Someone had closed it. "No service," I muttered, holding up my phone. The basement was a dead zone for reception. The air felt heavier now, the kind of silence that listens back. We stood there, straining to hear anything. Then, faint and unmistakable, a woman's voice drifted from upstairs. Soft, measured. "I see you." Ella's eyes went wide and I felt my skin go cold. "That's not funny," I whispered, though neither of us had made the sound. The footsteps came next, measured, heavy, pacing in the hallway above us. Whoever it was didn't rush, didn't speak again, just walked back and forth as if deciding something. I grabbed Ella's wrist. "We need a plan." "The side window," she said, but it was too high to reach without the old step ladder which was upstairs in the garage. We moved quietly, trying to think through our options. Every few minutes the basement door rattled like someone was testing it. We didn't respond. Time started losing shape. Minutes felt like hours. I tried to keep track by the movie still playing in the background, but even that felt distant, unreal. At one point I thought I heard the sound of fabric brushing against the basement door, followed by a sharp, deliberate tap against the wood. It was like a signal, one we didn't want to understand. Around midnight the footsteps retreated. I crept to the small window and pulled the curtain back just enough to see. Muddy footprints led away from the house, disappearing into the woods. We didn't sleep. The silence after the footsteps left wasn't comforting. It was the kind of silence that makes you feel like something is still watching you, waiting. I didn't believe for a second that whoever had been upstairs was gone for good. Ella and I stayed huddled in the corner of the basement couch, our blankets pulled up like shields. Every time the wind rattled the windows, my muscles jumped. "We should try the door again," Ella whispered. I nodded, though my stomach churned at the thought. We approached it slowly. I wrapped my fingers around the handle and twisted. It turned. No resistance. "Wait," I said, holding Ella back. "If it's unlocked now, that means that they unlocked it," she finished, her voice barely audible. Neither of us moved. I didn't want to open it and see someone standing there, smiling. My mind kept replaying the whisper, the way it had been too calm, too certain. We decided to wait until we could hear a car outside. Ella's parents weren't due back until Sunday, but maybe a neighbor or someone would pull into the driveway. Time dragged. We didn't hear footsteps again, but I still couldn't shake the feeling that someone might be crouched in the hallway above, listening for us. Around 2 a.m., we heard rain start to patter against the basement window. It got heavier fast, the kind of downpour that muffled all other sounds. It scared me more than the quiet because now we wouldn't hear someone moving around outside. Ella finally said, "We can't just sit here all night." She stepped forward, cracked the basement door open just an inch and peered through. Her eyes flicked left then right. "No one," she mouthed. We crept up the stairs together. The hallway was dark except for the faint glow from the kitchen nightlight. Everything looked normal, but there was something wrong with the air. It smelled faintly of wet earth, like whoever had been inside had tracked in the storm with them. I spotted it before Ella did, a small muddy handprint on the wall near the kitchen. It was too low to be an adult's, but it was also too big for a child. We locked every door and window, then called my mom. It rang twice before she picked up, her voice groggy. "Mom, you need to come get us now," I said, my voice shaking. "Someone's been in the house." She didn't even question it. "I'm on my way." We stayed by the front door, watching the rain blur the streetlights outside. 10 minutes later, headlights cut through the downpour, and I've never been so relieved to see my mom's car. By the time the police arrived, the adrenaline had worn off enough for me to start shaking. They searched the house top to bottom while we stood in the living room, wrapped in blankets. One officer found more muddy prints in the hallway near the laundry room and confirmed they didn't match anyone in Ella's family. "The door lock on the basement is old," one officer said. "Outside if you know how. It's easy to latch or unlatch from the idea that someone knew the house that well made my skin crawl." When Ella's parents returned the next day, they were horrified. They called the police station for updates, but all they had were the prints and the report. The officers suspected the intruder had been watching the house for a while, maybe even before Ella's parents left. I couldn't stop thinking about the voice. It wasn't loud, but it had been deliberate, like it wanted us to know we were trapped. For days after, I couldn't sleep without my lamp on. At night, I'd hear phantom sounds, imagined creaks in the hallway, soft tapping on my bedroom door. My parents told me it was just my mind replaying the fear, but it felt too real. Ella texted me almost every night after that. Neither of us could shake the feeling that the person might come back. "It's worse because we didn't see their face," she said once, "even know who to be afraid of." We don't. The police never found the intruder. No arrests, no suspects, just a lingering question mark hanging over everything. Even in daylight, Ella's house felt different to me now. I still went over sometimes, but the basement was off limits in my mind. I avoided looking at the small window where I'd seen the footprints vanish into the woods. The worst part wasn't the fear of them coming back. It was realizing they could have been right behind that door for hours, listening to every word we said. The week after it happened, the November rain still hadn't let up. Every afternoon, I'd walk past Ella's house on my way home from school, and see the blinds drawn tight. She told me her parents had installed cameras, one at the front door, one above the garage, and one pointing toward the backyard. Still, she said she barely slept. When I finally went back over, it felt like stepping into a different house. The lights were all on, even in the daytime, and the basement door had been fitted with a new deadbolt. Her dad showed me how it locked from both sides. He said it made them feel safer, but I didn't have the heart to tell him it didn't make me feel safer at all. We sat in the living room, the curtains pulled shut. The air was heavy, like the house was holding its breath. I glanced toward the kitchen and noticed the wall where the muddy handprint had been, freshly painted over. I couldn't help wondering if covering it up made it easier to forget, or harder. "You think they'll ever catch them?" Ella asked. I shook my head. "I don't think they want to be caught. I don't think they want to be caught." The truth was, I had a theory I hadn't told anyone. That voice we'd heard, it didn't sound rushed or panicked, like someone breaking in for the first time. It was calm, like they'd done this before, like they enjoyed it. At night, I kept replaying the sound of the lock clicking behind us in the basement. It made me realize something I hadn't thought about in the moment. Whoever it was, they'd wanted us trapped down there. Maybe not to hurt us right away, but to keep us from leaving. That thought stuck with me more than anything else. By the end of the month, things had gone back to normal for everyone else, but not for me. My parents thought I was overreacting when I triple-checked the locks before bed. My friends at school thought the whole thing sounded kind of cool, like a movie. But I knew better. One Saturday, I was in my room reading when my mom came in and sat on the edge of my bed. "You can't let this change who you are," she said. "Being careful is good, but living in fear is giving them exactly what they wanted." That stuck with me. I realized she was right. The intruder had already taken one night from me, and if I let the fear win, they'd take a lot more. It didn't mean I forgot. I still noticed shadows in my peripheral vision when I walked past windows. I still froze at certain noises, but I started carrying myself differently, less like a scared kid and more like someone who refused to be an easy target. Months later, Ella and I talked about that night again. She told me she still avoided the basement, even though her parents tried to convince her it was fine. "I just can't be down there without thinking about it," she admitted. We didn't need to say more. Some experiences carve deep grooves in your memory. They never really leave. You just learn to walk alongside them. That night taught me the kind of lesson no book or movie ever could. Danger doesn't always announce itself with breaking glass or blaring alarms. Sometimes it's quiet. Sometimes it whispers through a locked door. And sometimes the scariest thing is knowing it can happen anywhere, even in the safest place you know. Safety isn't just about locked doors and bright lights. It's about paying attention to your instincts and respecting the unease they bring. Fear can keep you cautious, but courage is what lets you keep living. If you had told me at the start of September that I'd spend one of the scariest nights of my life at Chloe Bennett's house, I would have laughed and told you to quit messing with me. I'd known Chloe since middle school. Well, known might be a stretch. She was one of those people you orbit in the same social universe without ever quite breaking into their inner circle. She was bold and magnetic, the kind of girl who could walk into a room and make it brighter just by existing. And me? I was the quiet kid with the astronomy obsession, the one who'd rather point out the craters on the moon than start a conversation. But somehow, by some miracle of fate, she'd invited me to a small get-together. "Just a chill sleepover," she'd said, with a few other friends. When it turned out the few other friends couldn't make it, I tried not to overthink it. My mind raced with two competing realities. One, I'd be hanging out with Chloe alone upstairs while her parents entertained guests downstairs. And two, I'd be hanging out with Chloe alone upstairs while her parents entertained guests downstairs. I got to her house just before sunset, my telescope slung awkwardly over my shoulder. She teased me right away. "What, you're planning to map constellations from my window?" she asked, smirking. I mumbled something about the Orion Nebula being visible this time of year, and she just laughed. Not in a mean way, but in that disarming Chloe way that made you want to keep talking to her. By the time we'd settled into her room with pizza and music, my nerves had mostly melted into something warmer. She handed me a sketchbook and pencil and started showing me how to capture shading. "You've got the steady hands for this," she said. I wanted to tell her my hands were only steady because I was gripping the pencil like my life depended on it. At around 10:30, rain began tapping against the windows. I noticed the sound immediately, soft, rhythmic, almost like a low whisper. By 11:15, the storm had picked up, the wind pushing tree branches into the siding with little scrapes. When the power flickered, Chloe giggled. "This is like movie-perfect timing. If the lights go out, I'm blaming you and your creepy star maps." I laughed, but something about the shadows in her room had changed. I couldn't pinpoint it, just a heaviness in the air, the kind that makes you pay attention to every creak and shift around you. And then, right on cue, the house went dark. The first thing I noticed after the lights died was how quiet everything became downstairs. Chloe's parents' dinner party had been a low hum in the background all night, clinking glasses, laughter, bursts of conversation, but now it was gone. I thought maybe the storm had drawn everyone's attention, but the silence was unnerving. Chloe lit a candle from her nightstand, her face glowing in the flicker. "Romantic, huh?" she teased. My laugh came out shaky. I couldn't shake the sense that we weren't as alone upstairs as we thought. A sound came from the hallway, a slow, deliberate creak, like someone putting weight on an old floorboard. My eyes flicked toward her bedroom door. Chloe tilted her head. "That's weird," she murmured. We grabbed my flashlight and stepped into the hallway. The beam cut through the dark, landing on something that didn't make sense. A trail of muddy footprints, starting near the back door and leading into the living room. They were fresh, the water glistening in the beam. "Someone's in the house," I said, barely above a whisper. Chloe's hand brushed mine, and for a moment, despite the fear prickling up my spine, I felt a flicker of something else. Connection, closeness. We moved slowly, scanning the living room. A chair was tipped at an odd angle. A coat hung halfway off a hook, as if someone had brushed past too quickly. The house groaned under the weight of the storm, but somewhere in between the wind and rain, I heard it. A whisper. I couldn't make out the words, but the tone was wrong. We retreated to her room and shut the door quietly. The closet felt like the safest spot, so we squeezed inside, my flashlight turned off to avoid giving us away. Outside, the whispering grew louder. It didn't sound like her parents or any of their guests. "Stay calm," I whispered. She nodded, but her grip on my arm told me she was just as scared as I was. The first few minutes in that closet felt like hours. Every sound was magnified, the steady drum of the rain, the faint rattle of the window glass, Chloe's quick, shallow breathing. I could hear my own heartbeat, so loud I was sure whoever was out there could hear it too. The footsteps came next, slow, measured. Whoever it was wasn't rushing. That was worse somehow, like they weren't afraid of being caught. The floorboards gave away their path, across the hall, into the guest bedroom, back toward the living room. The whispering had stopped. Chloe leaned toward me, her lips almost brushing my ear. Voice was trembling, but she was trying to keep it low. That they wouldn't be whispering. "It's not my parents," she said. They wouldn't be walking around like I thought about her parents. If they were downstairs with friends, wouldn't we hear them? Shouldn't there be voices, laughter, anything? But the house was silent except for the storm and those deliberate steps. I thought about calling the police, but my phone was charging on her desk. Chloe's was in her bag by the bed. We'd have to get to them without whoever was out there noticing. I could picture the layout in my head. 3 steps to the closet door, 5 more to the desk. But the second I imagined opening that door, I saw the beam of my flashlight sweeping across a face I didn't recognize. The footsteps stopped outside her bedroom. I froze. Chloe's grip tightened on my arm until it hurt. The doorknob rattled once, twice, then stilled. A shadow passed under the crack at the bottom of the door, blotting out the faint candlelight for a moment. We didn't breathe. Finally, the sound of retreating steps. They moved down the hallway, slower this time. I counted each creak until I couldn't hear them anymore. We waited another full minute before I dared to crack the closet door. The bedroom looked exactly as we'd left it, except the candle was out. We hadn't blown it out. I reached for my phone first, the dim light from the screen almost blinding after so much darkness. No signal. Chloe's phone was the same, just a red no-service icon glaring back at us. The storm must have knocked out the tower nearby. The smart thing would have been to stay put until her parents came upstairs. But I had this gnawing sense that whoever was in the house wasn't just wandering aimlessly. The muddy footprints downstairs hadn't been random. They'd started at the back door. That meant they'd come in intentionally, from the yard, during the party. Chloe wanted to barricade the door. I couldn't argue. We pushed her desk against it as quietly as we could. It wasn't much, but it was something. Then we killed the flashlight to make the room look empty from the hall. For a while there was nothing. Just the storm, the occasional groan of the old house, the feeling of time stretching thin. Then, 3 knocks, soft, on the bedroom door. I almost spoke, almost asked who it was, but something told me not to. The knocks came again, faster this time, followed by a low voice. I couldn't make out the words, but it wasn't anyone I knew. Chloe pressed her hand to her mouth to keep from making a sound. Then came a sound I'll never forget. The slow scrape of something metal along the outside of the door, like a key or a knife testing the lock. I felt my stomach drop. Whoever it was knew we were in there. I looked at Chloe and mouthed, "Window." She nodded. We moved as silently as we could, inching toward the far side where her window opened onto the porch roof. The wind outside was brutal, but it was our only option. I unlatched the window, easing it open just enough to let the cold air rush in. Chloe climbed out first, her hair whipping in the gusts. I followed, pulling the window shut behind me. We crouched low on the porch roof, the rain soaking us instantly. Through the glass, I saw a figure step into her room, tall, hooded, moving straight toward the closet we'd been in. Chloe grabbed my hand, and together we made our way toward the gutter, the only way down. The rain made the shingles slick and the wind fought us every step. My hands were numb, my clothes plastered to my skin, and the drop to the driveway below felt like it had doubled in height since the last time I'd been on a roof. Chloe's grip on my hand was like a lifeline, steady, desperate. We reached the gutter, and I tested it, half expecting it to snap under our weight. It held, but it groaned. I swung one leg over, trying to lower myself slowly, but my sneaker slipped. I ended up half sliding, half falling the last few feet, landing in a crouch that jarred my knees. Chloe came next, managing it a little more gracefully. We didn't speak. We just ran. The storm stung our faces, sheets of water blurring the streetlights. My lungs burned, my heart still hammering from the moment I'd seen that figure in her room. I kept glancing back, afraid I'd see someone in the window watching us, but it was dark. Either they'd moved away from the glass or they didn't care that we'd escaped. Chloe's parents' dinner party was at a neighbor's 2 houses down. I don't think they were expecting 2 soaked teenagers to burst through the front door, gasping for air, words tumbling over each other as we tried to explain. The laughter and warm light of the party evaporated into cold, tight silence. Her father's face went pale. He grabbed his coat and flashlight, sprinting back toward the house with 2 of the neighbors. Her mom kept us in the kitchen, wrapping blankets around our shoulders, trying to make sense of what we were saying. It felt like forever before they came back. The police were on the way, they said, and no one was in the house anymore. But there had been signs, muddy footprints in the hallway, a back door that had been pried open, the faint smell of cigarette smoke in the living room. Things slightly moved, Drawers just barely open. Whoever had been there hadn't taken anything. Or maybe they hadn't gotten the chance. The officers arrived within minutes, their radios crackling, boots leaving wet prints on the floor. They searched the house, the yard, even the street. Nothing. The intruder had vanished into the night, the storm washing away any chance of finding where they'd gone. By the time they left, it was well past midnight. Chloe's parents insisted I stay in the guest room instead of walking home. I didn't argue, though I knew neither of us would sleep. We sat on the floor of her room, still wrapped in blankets, listening to the wind howl outside. She leaned against me, and for the first time since the night had turned, I felt her body relax. Just a little. "You really think they were watching the house before tonight?" she asked. I nodded. Easier for them. Yeah, I think they were waiting for the right moment. And the storm, it made it. She didn't respond. We just sat there, the weight of what almost happened hanging between us. Morning came gray and quiet. The storm had passed, but the footprints remained in my mind, vivid and unsettling. As I walked home, my telescope case slung over my shoulder, I realized I'd never look at Chloe's house or my own the same way again. That night taught me something I didn't want to learn but needed to know. Safety isn't a given. Even the places you know best can change in an instant. And sometimes the shadows at the edge of your vision aren't just tricks of the light. Trust your instincts. If something feels wrong, it probably is. Acting quickly, even if it feels overcautious, can be the difference between a close call and a disaster. Some places make you feel small in a good way, like when you stand at the edge of Lake Michigan and watch the horizon disappear into the haze. Then there are places that make you feel small in a way you can't explain, where the air seems to lean in, pressing against your skin as if something is paying attention. Hawthorne Hills was like that for me. It wasn't dangerous, not on paper. People left bikes leaning against fences without locks, and neighbors waved from their porches. But once night fell, the heavy woods that hemmed in every yard seemed to breathe. The black outlines of the trees didn't sway so much as they shifted, as though moving on their own terms. Madeline's house sat on the far edge of town with only the forest at its back. It was bigger than any place I'd ever stayed. 2 stories, huge windows, rooms that felt too wide for their furniture. We'd been planning the sleepover for weeks. Her parents were on a retreat up north, leaving us the house. She saw it as freedom. I saw it as an invitation for the imagination to turn on itself. We spent the first hour like we always did. Bowls of popcorn balanced between us, game controllers in hand, trading gossip and laughing at our own terrible jokes. Madeline had this effortless confidence about her. She could sit in an empty room and make it feel full just by talking. I think that's why I liked being around her. She didn't leave any space for my quiet, twitchy thoughts to take over. Around 11, she suggested a movie. I picked a psychological thriller I'd been wanting to re-watch. She rolled her eyes but agreed. The storm outside deepened as the opening credits rolled. The windows in her living room were big enough to reflect half the room in the glass, and with the lights dimmed, our reflections sat over the dark blur of the yard. Every time the wind hit the house, the trees seemed to jerk forward in those reflections, like they were trying to get closer. I tried to focus on the movie, but the shadows didn't match the rhythm of the lightning. It was subtle at first, so much so that I wondered if I was imagining it. A shape stretching slightly, holding still too long. I told myself it was the way the branches moved. Still, my stomach knotted tighter with each glance. By the time I stood to get water, the rain had turned into a hard, steady drumming. The kitchen smelled faintly of the vanilla candles her mom always left on the counter. I was halfway to the sink when I noticed it. The back door was open. Just an inch, but enough for the night air to push in, cold and damp. The latch rested loosely against the frame. I didn't remember hearing it open. "Madeline," I called, my voice breaking halfway through her name. She appeared in the doorway, looking more annoyed than concerned. "What? Did you leave the door like this?" She walked over, peered at the gap, and gave a small laugh. "When the wind's strong, you have to pull it really tight for it to stay." "No," But the latch pops sometimes. I stared at her. You think it just popped? Yeah. What? Do you think there's a murderer in the woods waiting for a gust of wind to help him out? She grinned, trying to make me laugh, but I didn't. I closed it, locking it with a firmness that made the frame creak. Back in the living room, we wrapped ourselves in blankets. Madeline joked that I was going to check every lock in the house. She wasn't wrong. My attention kept drifting to the hallway and the windows. The storm pressed harder against the house, rattling the old panes until one flicker of light made me jump. Then, at exactly midnight, the power went out. The silence after the TV cut was almost worse than the darkness. I heard something, a sound just past the bedroom door upstairs. It wasn't loud, but deliberate, like a single footstep placed for us to notice. Madeline's smile faltered. That's probably the wind too, right? I didn't answer. The sound came again. Slow. Closer. Madeline and I exchanged a look in the dark that said everything. Neither of us wanted to speak the word intruder, but the thought was already lodged in our minds. I reached for my phone, but the service bars were gone, probably knocked out by the storm. The house seemed to breathe differently without power. Every small sound traveled farther, sharper, like the walls weren't solid anymore. We stayed frozen on the couch until another step echoed from the hallway upstairs. This one was heavier, slower. Madeline whispered, "Should we check?" I wanted to say no. I wanted to say we should barricade ourselves in the nearest room. But there's a strange logic that takes over when you're scared. You think if you confront the thing, you'll regain control. So I nodded even though my gut screamed against it. We grabbed a flashlight from the kitchen drawer, the beam wobbling over furniture as we made our way up the stairs. My heart pounded so loudly that it almost masked the faint creak of another step somewhere above us. At the landing, the hallway stretched out, a narrow tunnel of shadow. The flashlight caught on something near the far end, a chair from Madeline's room, now sitting in the hallway like it had been placed there deliberately. "Did you?" I started, but she shook her head. We both froze at a soft sound that followed, a dragging, like fabric or a shoe sliding across wood. It came from the guest bedroom, the one with the big bay window that looked out on the backyard. We didn't go in. We couldn't. Instead, we backed down the hall and ducked into her bedroom closet, pulling the door shut until only a thin slice of light came through. We could hear movement, slow, steady, almost careful. The sound of someone who wasn't searching, but waiting. Madeline's breathing was shallow. I pressed my hand to hers in the dark. She gripped it like it was the only solid thing in the world. The footsteps stopped. Then came the whisper. "I've been watching." It wasn't loud. It wasn't even threatening in tone. It was worse. It was calm, as though the person believed what they were saying was natural. Madeline's grip on my hand tightened until it hurt. Neither of us moved. I didn't think I could if I tried. The whisper hung in the air long after it stopped. I thought maybe I'd imagined it, but Madeline's wide eyes told me she'd heard it too. We stayed in the closet for what felt like hours, though it was probably minutes. The footsteps returned, this time moving away from the room, heading back toward the stairs. Each step was deliberate, never rushed, as though the person wasn't worried about us running. I thought about making a break for it. We could sprint down the stairs, maybe get out the front door. But the thought of stepping into that hallway and seeing whoever was out there, my body wouldn't obey. Eventually, the sound shifted. A faint creak from downstairs, the groan of the front door opening, and then silence. We stayed where we were, afraid that stepping out too soon would put us face to face with the person again. When we finally emerged, the storm had eased, leaving only the drip of water from the eaves. The living room looked normal at first glance. Then I noticed the details. The back door was open again, muddy footprints trailing in a slow arc around the coffee table, stopping at the base of the stairs. A blanket from the couch was folded neatly on the armrest. even though I knew we'd left it crumpled on the floor. The police arrived 20 minutes after we called, their flashlights sweeping through the house and yard. They found no sign of forced entry, but the footprints outside circled the house in wide loops, crossing the same spots over and over. One of the officers said the prints were fresh, the soil still wet from the storm. Whoever it was had been moving in and out long before we'd noticed. Madeline tried to laugh it off as some creepy neighbor, but I could see in her eyes that she didn't believe her own words. The police left just after 1 a.m., leaving us with a lock that looked intact but no longer felt like protection. Madeline's parents drove back in the early morning hours after she called them, her voice trembling more than she'd wanted them to notice. I didn't sleep. Even with the lights back on, every creak of the old house made me flinch. I kept replaying the whisper in my mind, the calmness of it, like the person had been telling the truth and expected me to accept it. By daylight, the yard looked harmless, sunlight spilling across wet grass, the footprints fading in the warming air. But standing there with the police tape flapping on the back gate, I felt something I couldn't shake. The night hadn't been about someone trying to steal or hurt us in a quick, obvious way. It had been about patience, about someone who had been content just to be there, in our space, without us knowing. That thought was worse than any locked door or smashed window. Madeline tried to distract us with pancakes, piling them high and drenching them in syrup. But every time the floor creaked under her feet, my shoulders tightened. Her parents kept the conversation light, but I saw the way her mom checked the doors twice before sitting down. In the days after, I started noticing things I'd never thought about before. I checked my bedroom window locks before bed. I glanced behind me when walking home, even in broad daylight. It wasn't paranoia. It was the awareness that safety isn't a constant but a moment-to-moment thing. Madeline texted me one night. "Can't sleep. Every time I close my eyes, I hear it." I didn't have to ask what it meant. It's been months now, but some part of me still expects to hear that whisper again, sliding under a door, reminding me that eyes can be on you without your knowing. We'd spent that night thinking the danger was about to happen, but in truth it already had. Sometimes the real danger isn't the sudden break-in or the loud threat. It's the quiet patience of someone who's already crossed the line without you knowing. Safety isn't just about strong locks or closed doors. It's about being aware, trusting your instincts and never dismissing the unease that rises for no apparent reason. Because often, that feeling is the first and only warning you'll get. People talk about safe places like they're permanent things, solid walls, sturdy locks, familiar faces. But I learned a long time ago that safety isn't a structure you can see. It's a feeling, and once you lose it, even for a second, it's almost impossible to get back. Back in October of 2018, Maplewood was already in the middle of its seasonal shift. The air had that sharp bite in it, the kind that made every breath feel cleaner than the last. Fallen leaves clung to sidewalks, damp and dark from last night's rain. I'd spent most of my afternoons walking the long way home just to avoid passing my mom's place. Things had been rough since my parents split earlier that year. My mom had started surrounding herself with strangers, people who smelled like cheap beer and wore expressions I couldn't trust. My dad, doing his best to keep us afloat, was always at the shop. I stayed out as much as possible, drifting from one friend's couch to another. That Friday, Lucas invited me over for the night. We'd been friends since we were 10, the kind of friends who could sit in total silence for an hour and not feel awkward. His place was my unofficial safe house. 2 stories, pale green siding, a wide porch where we used to eat popsicles in the summer. It was just him and his dad, which meant no awkward family dinners, no strange men in the kitchen. When I got there, the house smelled like pizza and garlic bread. Lucas was already sprawled on the couch, a controller in his hand, his usual half-smile ready. We settled into our rhythm, video games, bad jokes, too much soda. At some point, we pulled up a playlist of ridiculous YouTube videos and laughed so hard we couldn't breathe. It was after midnight when the mood shifted, though at first I didn't even realize it was happening. Somewhere between switching game discs and arguing over which one to play next, I heard it. A faint shuffle, like bare feet dragging across tile. I froze mid-motion. "What?" Lucas asked, glancing up. "I thought I heard something," I said, tilting my head toward the kitchen. He shrugged. "Probably the fridge. It makes weird noises sometimes." I wanted to believe that, I really did. But then came something else. Soft, almost melodic. A humming sound. It wasn't the kind of humming you do absent-mindedly while folding laundry. This was deliberate, slow, and oddly familiar, though I couldn't place why. The tune seemed to curl its way through the hallway, wrapping around me before I could think. "Lucas, do you hear that?" I whispered. He paused the game, listening. "That's weird." His voice was low now, cautious. The sound grew louder. I stood up without thinking, moving toward the staircase. The house felt different all of a sudden. Colder, like a window had been left open somewhere. The light from the living room barely reached the kitchen at the end of the hall, but I could see a shape moving. At first I thought maybe it was Lucas's dad coming home early, but the figure was smaller, hunched, shoulders curved forward like she was carrying invisible weight. Her hair hung in tangled clumps, and she muttered between notes of her humming, words too soft to catch. My breath caught. Something about her face. It triggered a memory I didn't want. She looked like someone I knew, or used to know. "Lucas," I whispered, not taking my eyes off her. "Call the police. Now." He didn't argue. The look on my face must have told him I wasn't joking. He grabbed his phone, but I took it from him. I didn't trust his hands to stay steady enough. My voice was barely above a whisper as I gave the dispatcher the address, describing what little I could see. The woman turned slowly toward the living room, humming louder now. Her eyes were glassy, unfocused, but there was something in them that made my stomach twist. We backed into Lucas's bedroom, locking the door. My pulse was in my ears. The operator kept talking in my ear, telling us to stay quiet and stay put. Somewhere below us, cabinet doors slammed. Drawers opened and closed. Then silence. I had no idea how long it would last. The quiet was somehow worse than the noise. Every second without sound felt like a setup, like she was waiting for the perfect moment to start again. I sat on the floor with my back against Lucas's bed, gripping his phone so tightly my knuckles ached. Lucas whispered, "What's she doing?" "I don't know," I breathed. "Don't talk." From somewhere below us, the humming resumed, but softer now. I could picture her in my mind, crouched in the kitchen, running her hands over the counters. The dispatcher's voice in my ear was calm and deliberate. "Officers are on their way. Stay where you are. Don't engage." A loud thunk made both of us flinch. It came from the living room, followed by the sound of metal scraping. My stomach dropped as I realized what it was. Cutlery drawers. She was pulling them open. The humming stopped, and in the silence, I could hear faint clinking. Knives. Lucas's eyes widened. "I know," I said quickly. "Just stay quiet." The minutes stretched endlessly. The storm outside rattled the windows, and the occasional flicker of lightning lit up the room in short, ghostly flashes. My mind went to my mom's place, the kind of strangers she had around lately. The thought that this woman could somehow be connected to that world made my skin crawl. A new sound made my heart skip. A creak on the stairs. She was coming up. I motioned for Lucas to stay still, even as my hands started to shake uncontrollably. The dispatcher kept talking, telling me the police were only a few minutes away. I pressed the phone to my ear like it was a lifeline. The footsteps were slow, deliberate, the kind of pace someone takes when they're listening as much as they're moving. I could see the shadow of her feet under the gap in the door, pausing there, just inches from us. She didn't knock. She didn't speak. Then, as suddenly as they had arrived, the footsteps retreated, moving back toward the kitchen. I didn't dare breathe until I heard the faint creak of the front door opening. The wail of sirens cut through the storm, and I nearly sagged in relief. Lucas let out a shaky breath he'd clearly been holding for minutes. I told the dispatcher the police were here and ended the call. We stayed in the room until we heard a firm knock and a voice calling, "Police, come out slowly." Maplewood. When we stepped into the hallway, 2 uniformed officers were already inside, their radios crackling. Another was in the kitchen, speaking into his shoulder mic. The front door stood open, rain blowing in from outside. "She's gone," one of the officers told us, though his tone made it clear that wasn't the same as safe. I described her as best I could. The hair, the clothes, the humming. But the details felt jumbled in my head, like a dream I couldn't hold on to. Lucas stayed quiet, staring at the counter where several knives had been laid out in a neat row. "She didn't take anything?" one officer asked. I shook my head. "I don't think she came here to take anything." The muddy footprints outside told their own story. They started at the tree line behind Lucas's backyard and led straight to the back door. One of the officers said she might have been in the area for hours before coming inside. Lucas's dad got home not long after, still in his work clothes, his face pale when he saw the officers. He kept thanking them, but his eyes kept drifting to us. 2 kids who looked like we'd just stepped out of a nightmare. As they wrapped up their questions, I caught sight of one officer scribbling something in his notebook, and I caught the word drifter. That word felt too small for what had just happened. Drifters pass through. They don't hum a tune you almost recognize. They don't stand outside your door in the dark. The house felt heavier after the police left, like the walls themselves were holding their breath. Lucas and I sat in silence in the living room while his dad checked every lock twice, then drew the blinds tight. The storm outside had eased, but I didn't feel any relief, just a hollow ache in my chest, like something had been taken that couldn't be put back. We didn't go back to video games. Neither of us mentioned trying to sleep. Lucas kept fiddling with the drawstring of his hoodie, his knee bouncing. "That was messed up," he said finally. His voice cracked halfway through. "Yeah," I said quietly, because I didn't have words for what it really was. I kept replaying the moment at the stairs, her shadow lingering just inches away. She could have opened the door. She could have come inside the room. And she didn't. That choice, whatever it meant, felt even more chilling than if she'd tried to get in. Around 2 in the morning, Lucas's dad brought us mugs of hot chocolate. We both took them, but mine went cold in my hands. Every sound, a car passing outside, the fridge kicking on, rain dripping from the eaves, made my heart jolt. It wasn't until the sky began to lighten that exhaustion finally dragged me under. When I woke, it was almost noon, and Lucas's dad was talking quietly on the phone in the kitchen. The smell of bacon and eggs filled the air, but it didn't make me feel hungry. Later that day, the police called back. They hadn't caught her yet, but they'd found evidence she'd been staying in an abandoned shed near the woods. There was no clear motive, no stolen items, just a bedroll, some canned food, and scribbled notes filled with nonsense phrases. The word "watching" appeared over and over. I didn't tell Lucas about that part. When I finally went home that night, I locked my bedroom door for the first time in my life. I double-checked the windows. I even pushed a chair against the doorknob, though I knew it wouldn't really stop anyone. It wasn't about stopping her. It was about trying to make my brain believe I was safe. It took months for that feeling to come back, and even then, it never fully did. Sleepovers stopped being carefree. I started noticing details more. The sound of footsteps on different floors, the exact moment a latch clicks shut, the way shadows move when someone passes by a window. Sometimes, late at night, when the house is quiet, I still hear it. Not the actual sound, just the memory. A faint lilting hum, almost familiar. And it's enough to make my skin prickle all over again. I learned something that night. Something I wish I didn't have to. Safety isn't a permanent state. It's a fragile thing built on a lot of assumptions, and it can vanish in a moment without warning. You can rebuild it, maybe, piece by piece, but you never quite forget the cracks. And if you're smart, you never ignore the little signs again. Looking back now, I can see the irony in how safe that night felt at the beginning. It was the middle of summer 2019, one of those warm July weekends where the heat sticks to you even after the sun goes down. Ethan had invited me over for a sleepover, which wasn't unusual. We'd been friends since 7th grade, and by now we had a sort of ritual. Pizza, video games, bad action movies, and staying up way later than we should. His parents were gone for the weekend, off on some anniversary trip. The house, a 2-story place on a quiet cul-de-sac, was all ours except for his older brother Jake, who had popped in earlier but left for a party. That left just me and Ethan. No parents, no rules, no one telling us to turn the volume down. We kicked off the night with pepperoni pizza and way too much soda, trash-talking each other over rounds of Mario Kart. At one point I laughed so hard I had to pause the game, clutching my stomach. The air conditioning hummed in the background, the faint scent of pizza grease lingering in the air. It felt like summer in its purest form. Simple, easy, comfortable. We switched to a movie around midnight. I remember the glow of the TV painting the living room walls in shifting colors, and the muffled sound of crickets outside through the cracked kitchen window. The house creaked occasionally, the way houses do when they settle for the night. Neither of us paid attention. It wasn't until about 1:30 in the morning that the first sound came, a sudden metallic bang from the kitchen. I paused mid-sip of my Mountain Dew. Ethan barely glanced up. "Probably just the fridge making ice," he said, voice casual. I wanted to believe him. I really did. But there was something about the sound, sharp, deliberate, too heavy to be ice shifting in a bin. I listened for a moment, heard nothing, and let it go. Then came the knocking. It was slow at first, deliberate, each knock echoing through the house. We looked at each other. Ethan frowned and stood up, padding quietly toward the front door. I followed, heart starting to thump. Through the narrow pane of glass beside the door, I saw him. A man, well-dressed, slacks, a button-up shirt, even a tie. But there was something strange about him. He was holding a small envelope in one hand, his other hand resting casually in his pocket. Ethan hesitated. The man smiled, but it wasn't the kind of smile you see in commercials or family photos. It was thin, forced. His eyes didn't match it. "Probably just a neighbor," Ethan whispered. But something in me screamed not to open the door. "Don't," I whispered, grabbing his wrist. The man knocked again. Then, as if deciding we weren't worth the wait, he walked away down the driveway. We stayed frozen by the door, listening to the sound of his footsteps fading. I told myself it was over. I told myself we were fine. But less than 10 minutes later, he came back. And this time, he wasn't alone. The second man was bigger, taller by at least a head, with wide shoulders that filled the porch light's glow. He wore a dark hoodie despite the summer heat. The first man still had the envelope, but now his expression had hardened, his polite act stripped away. The knocking was gone. This time they pounded, hard. Each thud rattled the door in its frame. "Open up!" one of them barked. Ethan and I locked eyes. "Who are they?" I whispered. "I don't know," he said, but his voice shook. The pounding turned to shouting, angry, garbled words we couldn't fully make out except for fragments. "Owe us," and "not playing around." My stomach flipped. Every instinct screamed that this wasn't some misunderstanding. "Call 911, I hissed. Ethan grabbed his phone, fumbling so badly he almost dropped it. I could hear the dispatcher's voice faintly when he finally connected. "2 men, they're at the door. Threatening." His words tumbled out in a rush. The men kept shouting, one of them stepping closer to the glass, cupping his hands to peer inside. His eyes swept the living room like he was searching for something. Or someone. I ducked out of sight, heart hammering against my ribs. "They're coming," Ethan whispered after a moment, hanging up. "Quiet. Police said stay inside. Stay." But quiet was impossible with the noise on the other side of the door. It wasn't just banging anymore. They kicked at the door, each blow sending a shiver through the wood. Then, just as suddenly as it started, it stopped. We waited, hardly breathing. Through the small window, I caught a glimpse of them walking down the driveway, the taller man glancing over his shoulder once before disappearing into the shadows. The silence they left behind felt heavier than the noise had. We didn't dare move at first. The living room felt too exposed, so we retreated into the kitchen, crouching behind the counter like kids hiding in a game of hide and seek. Except there was nothing playful about this. Minutes ticked by. Long, slow minutes filled with the hum of the fridge and the faint buzz of the porch light. My phone sat in my lap, screen glowing faintly with missed notifications from our group chat. It felt absurd that the outside world was still going on, oblivious. Then headlights swept across the windows. A car slowed in front of the house. My pulse spiked. "Is that them?" Ethan peeked. "No, it's the cops." Relief crashed into me so fast my legs nearly gave out. 2 officers stepped out, hands on their belts. We rushed to the door, fumbling with the lock. They listened as Ethan explained everything, their eyes scanning the street and neighboring houses. "Did they say what they wanted?" one officer asked. "Something about money," I said, my voice smaller than I intended, pointed to the envelope still on the porch. "And they left this." The officer crouched, slipping on gloves before picking it up. Inside was a single sheet of paper, scrawled with threats. Something about settling debts and families getting hurt. No names, no signature. Ethan's dad got home the next morning, his face pale as he listened. He swore he had no idea who they were or why they'd come. The police filed a report, promised to patrol the area, and left. But the damage was done. That night replayed in my head for weeks. Every knock at the door made my heart jump. Every unfamiliar car driving slow past my house set me on edge. Ethan tried to brush it off, believe it any more than I did. "They're gone, man." Cops scared him off. But I could tell he didn't. We never got answers. The police never found the men. The threat stopped, but the fear didn't. The house on that cul-de-sac never felt the same to me again. I started noticing how easy it would be for someone to watch us from the street. How the front windows gave a perfect view of the living room. How thin the locks on the doors really were. The world hadn't changed, but my understanding of it had. Months later, I walked down that same street on my way to Ethan's. It was daylight, sunny even, but when I reached his driveway, I stopped. I could still hear the pounding on the door in my mind. Still see the man's empty smile under the porch light. We talked less after that. Not because of a fight, just because some friendships don't survive the shift from innocence to awareness. That night taught me something I wish I could unlearn. Danger doesn't always break in with shattered glass or warning sirens. Sometimes it knocks politely first. Sometimes it stands right outside your door, waiting for you to open it. Never mistake familiarity for safety. The world doesn't send you a schedule for when your sense of security will be tested, and when it is, how you respond can be the only thing that keeps you safe. If you had asked me back in 2020 where I felt safest outside of my own home, I would have said Zoe's house without even thinking about it. We'd been friends since 6th grade, and her place was where I'd spent countless Friday nights sprawled on her bedroom floor with snacks, homework we'd never touch, and a playlist of songs we'd swear we'd never get tired of. It wasn't just a friend's house. It was an extension of my own. By November that year, life was different. My parents had divorced the year before, and the easy, predictable world I thought I lived in had been split down the middle. Sleepovers at Zoe's were my escape from the constant shuffle between my mom's apartment and my dad's condo. She never asked too many questions about it, just handed me a blanket and made space on her bed. That Friday was supposed to be one of those nights. The rain had been coming down since late afternoon, Portland's kind of rain, steady, unrelenting, the kind that soaked you through in minutes. Zoe lived in a 3-story townhouse just off Hawthorne Boulevard. Her parents were away for the weekend at a conference, and her younger sister Lily was at a friend's birthday party across town. The house creaked the way old houses do, every gust of wind bending the walls just enough to make the nails protest. The upstairs hallway light had this habit of flickering every few minutes, which Zoe swore was just the bulb, though I suspected the wiring had seen better days. We didn't mind. It was part of the house's personality. We started the night normally. Thai takeout in the living room, a blanket fort, and a marathon of the new crime drama everyone at school had been talking about. Somewhere between the first and second episode, I ended up telling Zoe about the knot of anxiety I'd been carrying since my parents split. She listened without interrupting, just nodding here and there, making me feel like I wasn't ridiculous for saying it out loud. By the time midnight rolled around, the rain had softened, but the wind picked up, rattling the windows. It was cozy in that way only rainy nights can be, until the first sound broke it. It wasn't loud, just a soft tapping against the window beside Zoe's bed. I thought maybe it was a branch, but when I looked, there was no tree close enough to touch the glass. "Did you hear that?" I asked. Zoe glanced up, half distracted by the show. "It's probably just the rain," she said. I wanted to believe her, but a moment later came the scratching, a slow, uneven scrape that made my skin prickle. We both sat up, the glow of the TV flickering across our faces. "That's not rain," I said quietly, and deep down, I already knew we weren't alone. The sound moved. That was the first thing that told me it wasn't some loose shutter or gust of wind. It shifted from the window to somewhere downstairs, like footsteps sliding along the back porch. Zoe grabbed her flashlight, the kind she kept in her nightstand for storms. The beam was too narrow, barely cutting through the dim hallway as we stepped out of her room. The stairwell was dark. We moved slowly, pausing when the floorboards complained under our weight. From the top I could see the faint light from the kitchen nightlight casting long shadows. One of those shadows moved. It wasn't the kind of movement you can explain away. Someone was down there. Zoe's breath caught beside me. "Oh my God," she whispered. I leaned just enough to see into the kitchen. A man, tall, wearing a hooded jacket, stood with his back to us, rifling through cabinets. He was muttering, low and steady, words I couldn't make out. His hands moved quickly, like he knew exactly where he wanted to look. My throat tightened. My first thought wasn't even to run. It was that we'd been caught in some nightmare we couldn't wake from. We didn't say another word. We bolted back up the stairs and into Zoe's room, slamming the door and turning the lock. My hands shook as I grabbed my phone. I kept my voice to a whisper when I spoke to the 911 operator, giving our address and explaining that there was someone in the house. The operator told us to stay put, stay quiet, and that officers were on their way. Zoe pressed her weight against the door, as if the thin wood could hold back whoever was downstairs. Every sound in the house became amplified. The faint clink of silverware hitting the counter, the shuffle of footsteps crossing the living room, the creak of the back door, and then silence. Those minutes between the last sound and the arrival of the police felt like hours. Zoe wouldn't move from the door. I kept expecting the handle to turn for that hooded figure to push his way in. When the knock finally came, I nearly screamed until I heard, "Portland Police." We opened the door slowly, relief and fear tangling in my chest. Two officers stood there, rainwater dripping from their jackets. They moved through the house with quiet efficiency, checking each room, each closet, each corner of the basement. They found the back window wide open, rain puddled on the hardwood floor beneath it. The kitchen drawers were still open, utensils scattered on the counter. Nothing obvious seemed missing. One officer asked us to describe the man. I could only give them fragments. A tall frame, dark jacket, the way he moved like he'd been there before. They didn't recognize the description. They told us it was possible he'd been lurking outside for hours before coming in. The thought made my skin crawl. After they left, Zoe and I didn't even pretend we could sleep. We stayed in the living room with every light on, checking the locks over and over. Morning didn't make it better. The daylight only made the back window's damage clearer. The latch had been pried open with something sharp. Zoe called her parents. They drove home that afternoon, their faces pale and tight-lipped as they walked through the house with the police report in hand. By the end of the week, there were new locks on every door and window, and Zoe's dad had installed motion sensor lights and cameras. We watched the feed the first night, flinching at every passing car's headlights. But the real damage wasn't to the house. It was to the way we saw it. The place that had once felt like a second home now carried a shadow with it. Even now, years later, I still think about that night. Sometimes it's the sound I remember first, the slow scratching at the window. Sometimes it's the image of that open back window, rainwater seeping into the floor. But most often, it's the feeling. How quickly comfort turned to fear. How fragile safety really is. Zoe and I are still friends, but I've never stayed overnight at her house again. Not because I don't trust her, but because I can't trust the idea that a locked door means no one can get in. That night taught me something I wish I'd learned another way. Danger doesn't always kick the door in. Sometimes it slips quietly through the cracks, patient and unnoticed until it's standing in your kitchen. Never assume your safety is permanent. It takes only one moment, one mistake, for the walls you think protect you to show how thin they really are. By March of 2021, I'd known Liam for 6 years. We met in 7th grade, back when neither of us had figured out how to dress ourselves properly, and our biggest concern was surviving group projects without getting stuck with the kid who never did the work. Somewhere between awkward middle school lunches and late-night study sessions in high school, we became best friends. But over the past year, something shifted for me. I started noticing the curve of his smile when he laughed at something dumb I said, or the way his hair fell into his eyes when he was focused. I never said anything. I didn't want to risk ruining what we had. But the feelings were there, quietly burning in the background. That's why I didn't hesitate when he invited me over for a weekend sleepover. His parents were heading to a conference in Seattle, and his older sister, Emma, was technically in charge, though she had plans to spend the evening with friends. It would be just the two of us in that big suburban house in Bellevue, surrounded by the kind of stillness you only notice when the world outside is quiet. When I got there, the air had that crisp, clean smell that comes just before a storm. The sky was already heavy with clouds, and the first flickers of lightning danced faintly in the distance. Inside, the house felt warm and inviting, the faint scent of buttered popcorn and laundry detergent lingering in the air. We kicked things off with a rom-com, one of those predictable but comforting movies where you always know how it ends. Liam sat next to me on the couch, and every time our knees brushed, my stomach flipped. We joked about our classmates, paused the movie to reenact overly dramatic scenes, and tried to outdo each other with bad impressions of the lead actor. But as the evening went on, the storm rolled in, and the occasional flicker of the lights made the shadows in the corners of the room stretch just a little too far. By the time midnight crept up on us, the rain was coming down in steady sheets, pattering against the windows, and thunder rumbled faintly somewhere beyond the hills. That's when I heard it. It was faint at first, a slow, deliberate creak, like a footstep on the hallway floor outside Liam's bedroom. I froze mid-sentence, my head turning toward the sound. "Did you hear that?" I whispered. Liam's eyes darted toward the door. Casual ease it usually carried. "Probably just the wind," he said, but his voice lacked the I nodded, but my pulse had already quickened. Something about the sound didn't feel like the wind. We sat there for a moment listening. The storm filled the silence between us, but underneath it, the faint creaking came again. 2 slow, deliberate steps. Liam reached for the flashlight on his nightstand. "Let's just check it out," he said, his voice low. Part of me wanted to stay put, but the thought of sitting there and not knowing was worse. I followed him into the hallway, the beam of the flashlight slicing through the dim light. The shadows along the walls seemed to shift as we moved, and the old floor groaned under our weight. When we reached the living room, everything looked normal, except for the way the light from the window flickered across the wall in time with the storm. I was about to suggest we go back upstairs when a sudden bang echoed from downstairs. It wasn't the rumble of thunder or the groan of the house. It was sharper, closer. We both jumped. "That came from the kitchen," Liam said. We descended the stairs together, each step feeling heavier than the last. The flashlight's beam wavered slightly in Liam's hand. In the kitchen, the back door was ajar, the wind rattling it just enough to make the latch tap against the frame. Rain had blown in, darkening the edges of the welcome mat. Then I saw them, faint footprints pressed into the wet mat, leading from outside into the house. Liam. My voice was barely audible. His jaw tightened. He pushed the door shut, locked it, and glanced at me. "We're calling 911, he said. The dispatcher's voice on the phone was calm, asking for our address, a description of what we'd seen, and telling us to stay put until officers arrived. Liam stood near the doorway to the hall, the flashlight still in his hand like a weapon. Every now and then the beam caught his profile, the sharp line of his jaw, the focus in his eyes, and it made my chest tighten in a way I didn't expect in a moment like this. I sat at the edge of the couch, trying to listen for any movement, but the storm outside was relentless. Lightning flashed, casting the room in stark white for a split second before the thunder rolled in behind it. At one point, Liam moved closer, his hand brushing mine. It was a small thing, but it anchored me, pulled me back from the spiral of imagining what could be lurking in the house. We exchanged a quick, nervous smile, an acknowledgement that we were both scared, but in this together. The sound of tires crunching on wet pavement finally broke the tension. 2 police officers stepped inside, their radios crackling. They searched every floor, every closet, every corner. No one was there. But the back door's lock had fresh marks on it, the metal slightly bent where it had been forced. The footprints on the mat were already fading from the rain, but they were enough to confirm what we knew. Someone had been inside. The officers took our statements, told us to keep the doors locked, and promised to patrol the neighborhood for the rest of the night. When they left, the house felt too big, too quiet, despite the storm still raging outside. We ended up back in the living room, both of us unwilling to go upstairs. We turned on every light we could, the brightness chasing the shadows into corners. I wrapped myself in a blanket, and Liam sat beside me, his knee brushing against mine again. We talked in low voices, about school, about his sister, about how he'd been meaning to fix that back door for months, but never thought he'd need to. Somewhere in the middle of that conversation, I realized my hand was still in his. Neither of us moved. The adrenaline made it hard to sleep, so we stayed up until dawn, watching the storm slowly fade into a pale, washed-out morning. Weeks later, the house had new locks, and Liam's dad had installed a security system. On the surface, things went back to normal, but for me, they hadn't. That night lived in the quiet spaces of my mind, creeping back in whenever I heard the creak of a floorboard at night. But there was something else too. That night had pulled something into the open between Liam and me, something I'd been too afraid to name. We hadn't talked about it directly, but the way he'd stayed close, the way he'd looked at me when he thought I wasn't watching, it was different now. The fear had been real, but so had the connection. Sometimes I wondered if it would have happened without that storm, without the intruder who turned an ordinary night into something that changed us. Fear strips away the unnecessary. In those moments when the world narrows to danger and trust, you see who someone truly is. And sometimes, that truth is exactly what you've been waiting to find. By March of 2021, I'd known Liam for 6 years. We met in 7th grade, back when neither of us had figured out how to dress ourselves properly, and our biggest concern was surviving group projects without getting stuck with the kid who never did the work. Somewhere between awkward middle school lunches and late-night study sessions in high school, we became best friends. But over the past year, something shifted for me. I started noticing the curve of his smile when he laughed at something dumb I said, or the way his hair fell into his eyes when he was focused. I never said anything. I didn't want to risk ruining what we had. But the feelings were there, quietly burning in the background. That's why I didn't hesitate when he invited me over for a weekend sleepover. His parents were heading to a conference in Seattle, and his older sister Emma was technically in charge, though she had plans to spend the evening with friends. It would be just the two of us in that big suburban house in Bellevue, surrounded by the kind of stillness you only notice when the world outside is quiet. When I got there, the air had that crisp, clean smell that comes just before a storm. The sky was already heavy with clouds, and the first flickers of lightning danced faintly in the distance. Inside, the house felt warm and inviting, the faint scent of buttered popcorn and laundry detergent lingering in the air. We kicked things off with a rom-com, one of those predictable but comforting movies where you always know how it ends. Liam sat next to me on the couch, and every time our knees brushed, my stomach flipped. We joked about our classmates, paused the movie to reenact overly dramatic scenes, and tried to outdo each other with bad impressions of the lead actor. But as the evening went on, the storm rolled in, and the occasional flicker of the lights made the shadows in the corners of the room stretch just a little too far. By the time midnight crept up on us, the rain was coming down in steady sheets, pattering against the windows, and thunder rumbled faintly somewhere beyond the hills. That's when I heard it. It was faint at first, a slow, deliberate creak, like a footstep on the hallway floor outside Liam's bedroom. I froze mid-sentence, my head turning toward the sound. "Did you hear that?" I whispered. Liam's eyes darted toward the door. Casual ease it usually carried. "Probably just the wind," he said, but his voice lacked the "I nodded," but my pulse had already quickened. Something about the sound didn't feel like the wind. We sat there for a moment listening. The storm filled the silence between us, but underneath it, the faint creaking came again. 2 slow, deliberate steps. Liam reached for the flashlight on his nightstand. "Let's just check it out," he said, his voice low. Part of me wanted to stay put, but the thought of sitting there and not knowing was worse. I followed him into the hallway, the beam of the flashlight slicing through the dim light. The shadows along the walls seemed to shift as we moved, and the old floor groaned under our weight. When we reached the living room, everything looked normal, except for the way the light from the window flickered across the wall in time with the storm. I was about to suggest we go back upstairs when a sudden bang echoed from downstairs. It wasn't the rumble of thunder or the groan of the house. It was sharper, closer. We both jumped. "That came from the kitchen," Liam said. We descended the stairs together, each step feeling heavier than the last. The flashlight's beam wavered slightly in Liam's hand. In the kitchen, the back door was ajar, the wind rattling it just enough to make the latch tap against the frame. Rain had blown in, darkening the edges of the welcome mat. Then I saw them. Faint footprints pressed into the wet mat, leading from outside into the house. "Liam." My voice was barely audible. His jaw tightened. He pushed the door shut, locked it, and glanced at me. "We're calling 911, he said. The dispatcher's voice on the phone was calm, asking for our address, a description of what we'd seen, and telling us to stay put until officers arrived. Liam stood near the doorway to the hall, the flashlight still in his hand like a weapon. Every now and then, the beam caught his profile, the sharp line of his jaw, the focus in his eyes, and it made my chest tighten in a way I didn't expect in a moment like this. I sat at the edge of the couch trying to listen for any movement, but the storm outside was relentless. Lightning flashed, casting the room in stark white for a split second before the thunder rolled in behind it. At one point, Liam moved closer, his hand brushing mine. It was a small thing, but it anchored me, pulled me back from the spiral of imagining what could be lurking in the house. We exchanged a quick, nervous smile, an acknowledgement that we were both scared but in this together. The sound of tires crunching on wet pavement finally broke the tension. 2 police officers stepped inside, their radios crackling. They searched every floor, every closet, every corner. No one was there. But the back door's lock had fresh marks on it, the metal slightly bent where it had been forced. The footprints on the mat were already fading from the rain, but they were enough to confirm what we knew. Someone had been inside. The officers took our statements, told us to keep the doors locked, and promised to patrol the neighborhood for the rest of the night. When they left, the house felt too big, too quiet, despite the storm still raging outside. We ended up back in the living room, both of us unwilling to go upstairs. We turned on every light we could, the brightness chasing the shadows into corners. I wrapped myself in a blanket and Liam sat beside me, his knee brushing against mine again. We talked in low voices, about school, about his sister, about how he'd been meaning to fix that back door for months but never thought he'd need to. Somewhere in the middle of that conversation, I realized my hand was still in his. Neither of us moved. The adrenaline made it hard to sleep, so we stayed up until dawn, watching the storm slowly fade into a pale, washed-out morning. Weeks later, the house had new locks, and Liam's dad had installed a security system. On the surface, things went back to normal, but for me, they hadn't. That night lived in the quiet spaces of my mind, creeping back in whenever I heard the creak of a floorboard at night. But there was something else, too. That night had pulled something into the open between Liam and me, something I'd been too afraid to name. We hadn't talked about it directly, but the way he'd stayed close, the way he'd looked at me when he thought I wasn't watching, it was different now. The fear had been real, but so had the connection. Sometimes I wondered if it would have happened without that storm, without the intruder who turned an ordinary night into something that changed us. Fear strips away the unnecessary. In those moments when the world narrows to danger and trust, you see who someone truly is. And sometimes that truth is exactly what you've been waiting to find. I've always been told that summer nights in Asheville are peaceful, the kind of nights when the air hangs heavy with the scent of honeysuckle and cicadas sing in the distance. But I've also learned that peace can be deceptive. The summer of 2019 was the year that lesson was etched into me for good. At 17, I enjoyed a comfortable balance between independence and caution. My parents traveled often for work, and I'd gotten used to fending for myself at home, cooking simple meals, keeping the doors locked, and pretending I wasn't a little spooked by creaky floorboards at night. But my best friend Claire lived only 3 streets away, in a roomy 2-story house with wide windows and a big backyard that always smelled faintly of pine after rain. Her home felt like an escape from mine, livelier, cozier, and more welcoming. That July, Claire invited me over for a Friday night sleepover. It was a tradition for us: junk food, board games, staying up until 2 in the morning talking about boys and college plans. Normally I'd say yes without hesitation, but that week had been different. Our local news had been full of unsettling stories about late-night break-ins, mostly sheds and garages, but a few homes. One incident was only a few blocks away. I didn't want to sound paranoid, so I didn't tell Claire how uneasy I felt. By the time I walked up her driveway, the heat of the day had settled into a warm stillness. The sun was slipping low, painting the tops of the trees gold. Inside, the smell of buttered popcorn hit me first, then the sound of Claire's music drifting from the living room. She grinned when she saw me, tossing me a can of soda. "We're doing game night," she announced. "No scary movies this time, I promise." We sprawled out on the carpet, surrounded by open chip bags, soda cans sweating onto coasters, and an abandoned pile of Jenga blocks. We laughed so loudly I wondered if the neighbors could hear us. Every now and then, though, my eyes drifted to the large front windows. Beyond them, the trees swayed gently, casting shadows that danced across the lawn. Claire noticed once and smirked. "You're on edge tonight," she teased. "What's up?" I shrugged, brushing it off. "Just tired, and maybe I've been watching too much news." She rolled her eyes. "You worry too much. This neighborhood's boring as it gets. You'll see. Nothing ever happens here." Her words should have reassured me, but as night crept in, swallowing the last traces of daylight, I couldn't shake the feeling that we weren't as alone as she thought. It was close to midnight when the first shadow caught my eye. We dimmed the lights and switched to playing music softly from Claire's phone, the two of us lying on our stomachs and talking about summer crushes. I'd just taken a sip of soda when something, a faint movement, registered in my peripheral vision. I sat up, my gaze snapping toward the side gate visible through the living room window. At first I thought it was just a trick of the light, the kind that happens when tree branches sway. But then the shape shifted again, more deliberate this time. It wasn't a branch. The figure was crouched low, partially obscured by the fence but angled toward the house. Even from a distance, I knew the person wasn't just passing by. They were watching. "Claire," I whispered, my throat suddenly dry. "Come here." She groaned, not looking up from her phone. "What now?" "I'm serious. Look out there, by the gate." She got up reluctantly, pressing her face to the glass for a second before stepping back with a, "That's probably just one of my neighbors, or a raccoon. You've been paranoid all night." Laugh. I stared at her in disbelief. "That's not a raccoon, he's watching the house." "Or you're imagining it," she countered, already heading back to her spot on the carpet. Let's just keep talking." Come, but I couldn't. Something primal in me screamed that we needed to move, to lock the doors, to do something. I got up again, keeping my voice low. "Claire, I'm not kidding. This doesn't feel right." I led the way into the kitchen, flicking on the light and checking the back door. It was unlocked. My chest tightened as I slid the deadbolt into place. Claire followed me in, still rolling her eyes but quieter now. "What exactly do you think you saw?" she asked. "I know what I saw," I replied, "and I'm not taking chances." I opened the drawer by the stove and grabbed a pair of scissors. Not much, but it was something. The movement outside changed. The figure was no longer crouched. It was moving slowly along the side of the house. We could hear faint footsteps on the grass, then a pause, then the sound of the gate latch clicking softly. Claire's expression shifted from playful to pale. "Okay, that's not funny anymore." I pulled my phone from my pocket and dialed 911, my voice barely above a whisper as I explained what was happening. The dispatcher's calm tone was the only thing keeping me grounded. "Stay where you are," she instructed. "Do not confront him. Officers are on the way." The minutes that followed felt like an eternity. The man tried the back door, the handle rattling violently. Claire grabbed my arm, her nails digging into my skin. We both held our breath, every muscle tensed. I could hear his breathing, a slow, heavy rhythm on the other side of the thin glass. Then, as suddenly as it began, it stopped. We waited, listening to the sound of our own pounding hearts. Then came the faint crunch of footsteps retreating across the yard. I peeked out just enough to see the shadow slipping back toward the fence, disappearing into the night. The police arrived minutes later, their flashlights sweeping the yard. They found footprints in the damp soil leading from the gate to the back porch. No other evidence. Claire's parents were called, as were mine. My mother's voice was sharp with panic when she arrived, her arms wrapping around me like she could still shield me from what had already happened. The rest of the night was a blur of phone calls, questions, and reassurances. But even when I finally lay down in my own bed, the man's shadow stayed in my mind. Weeks later, I was still checking locks 3 times before bed. Every flicker of movement outside a window made my stomach clench. But the biggest change wasn't just in me, it was in Claire. She admitted later that she hadn't believed me until she saw his shadow move. We never talked about that night in detail, but the silence between us carried the weight of it. Never ignore your instincts. Fear can be inconvenient, even embarrassing, but it can also keep you alive. Trust it, especially when others don't.